At exactly 0317 hours on March 29, 2026, the most expensive kill ratio in modern warfare history was quietly entered into the Pentagon's damage assessment logs. A single Iranian Shahed 136 loitering munition, a propeller-driven Delta Wing drone that costs approximately $25,000 to manufacture, completed a terminal dive onto the upper fuselage of a United States Air Force E-3 Sentry airborne warning and control system aircraft parked on the tarmac at a forward operating base in the Gulf region. The resulting fire detonated the aircraft's internal electronics suite and rendered the platform a total loss. The E-3 Sentry carries a procurement cost of $500 million. That is a kill ratio of 20,000 to 1 in Iran's favor. In a single strike, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Air Force had just demonstrated something that defense planners in the Pentagon had been quietly terrified of for years. That the era of asymmetric drone warfare had matured to the point where a nation-state adversary could systematically destroy the most sophisticated command and control aircraft in the American inventory using weapons purchased at the price of a mid-range automobile. The U.S. Air Force had 17 E-3 Sentry aircraft at the beginning of 2026. As of this moment, it has 16. This was not an isolated incident. This was a message, and the message was transmitted across the entire kill chain from Tehran's IRGC command bunkers to the crowded decks of over 1,000 stranded oil tankers now drifting in the approaches to the Strait of Hormuz, waiting for a maritime corridor that has not existed for 31 days. To understand how the most critical waterway in the global economy became a floating graveyard, you need to go back to February 28, 2026, the moment the United States and Israel executed a joint decapitation strike on Iranian nuclear and military infrastructure in what CENTCOM designated Operation Epic Fury. Within 72 hours, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was dead. His son Mojtaba was elevated on March 8th in a succession that internal intelligence reports now describe as fractured, paranoid, and radiating strategic desperation. Iran's retaliation has not been restrained. It has been relentless. Since March 1st, AWACS conflict monitors have recorded more than 90 attempted Iranian strike packages against Israeli territory alone. Missiles, ballistic warheads, Shahed swarms, the majority of which were intercepted by the Iron Dome, David Sling, and a combined U.S.-Israeli THAAD battery network that has now expended over 1,000 Patriot and Terminal High Altitude Area Defense interceptors. That represents between 1 and 2 years of American Tomahawk production fired in less than a month. Simultaneously, Iran activated every proxy node in its so-called axis of resistance. The Islamic resistance in Iraq claimed 67 drone and missile attacks in the first 3 days of March alone, targeting U.S. forces at Harir Military Base and Erbil International Airport. On March 1st, an Iranian drone formation slipped through the layered air defense envelope surrounding Port Shuaiba in Kuwait and killed 6 American service members among the 13 U.S. personnel who have now died during Operation Epic Fury. On approximately March 25th, another Iranian strike injured 12 U.S. troops and destroyed 2 KC-135 Stratotanker aerial refueling aircraft at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, a strike whose pre-targeting reconnaissance, according to Ukrainian intelligence shared directly with President Zelensky, was conducted using Russian satellite imaging passes executed 3 days in succession before the attack. The coordination between Moscow and Tehran in ISR targeting is now confirmed at the highest levels of Allied intelligence sharing. But the central strategic crisis, the one that threatens to trigger a global economic catastrophe, dwarfing the conflict itself, is the Strait of Hormuz. At 0642 hours, stand by for the tactical picture. The Strait of Hormuz is a body of water, 21 nautical miles wide, at its narrowest point, flanked on the north by Iranian territory and on the south by the coast of Oman. Approximately 20% of the world's daily oil supply transits this corridor. 90% of the crude oil destined for Asia passes through it. There is no alternative route. There is no pipeline bypass. The strait is the jugular vein of the global energy system, and Iran has its thumb pressed against it with maximum pressure. Iran closed the strait immediately following the US-Israeli strikes. In the weeks since, IRGC naval units and IRGC aerospace force platforms have attacked approximately 20 commercial vessels, blocking the transit of all vessels already within its waters. Over 1,000 ships, the majority of them laden oil tankers, are now stranded. An estimated 20,000 seafarers are trapped in the corridor with no safe egress. Senior IRGC commanders have issued explicit threats to set fire to any vessel attempting to run the blockade, regardless of flag or nationality. Global oil prices have surged. International energy security agencies are warning of the largest supply disruption since the 1973 Arab oil embargo, except this one has no immediate off-ramp. And here is the critical tactical problem that no Pentagon press conference has addressed directly. The United States Navy currently has a catastrophic mine-sweeping gap. Iran has seeded the approaches to the strait with contact mines, influence mines, and bottom-laid pressure-sensitive devices consistent with Iranian UNES and M8 series naval mine doctrine. The mines are not placed randomly. They are laid in overlapping fields designed to funnel any mine-clearing force into pre-registered fire corridors where IRGC coastal defense batteries, including C-802 newer anti-ship missiles and mobile HY-2 Silkworm launchers, positioned on the Iranian coastline, hold targeting solutions. The problem is this: the United States Navy's mine countermeasure capacity has atrophied catastrophically since the Cold War. The Avenger-class mine countermeasure ships the Navy's primary dedicated mine-hunting vessels are aging, limited in number, and were never designed to operate inside an active, contested A2AD envelope while under simultaneous air and drone threat. The Foreign Policy Research Institute published an assessment on March 17th under the headline, "The Mine Gap, America Forgot How to Sweep the Sea." It was not an exaggeration. As of the beginning of April 2026, the U.S. Navy does not possess the organic, immediately deployable mine countermeasure capacity required to force open the Strait of Hormuz against a determined Iranian mining campaign without accepting catastrophic risk to its mine-sweeping platforms and the personnel aboard them. President Trump has requested NATO allies join a maritime task force to police the strait post-conflict. He was met with rejection. Spain has gone further, formally closing its airspace to U.S. aircraft involved in Iranian operations and blocking use of jointly operated Spanish military bases. The coalition is fracturing at precisely the moment maximum naval capacity is required. So CENTCOM has been forced to consider the only remaining kinetic option, a direct special operations ground insertion onto Karg Island itself. Karg Island, 36 square kilometers of Iranian-controlled territory sitting in the Persian Gulf, approximately 25 kilometers off the Iranian coast. It is the single most important piece of real estate in the global oil economy. An estimated 90% of Iran's crude oil exports even prior to the current war loaded at Karg Island's terminal facilities. It is also now the primary forward launch platform for the Iranian drone and missile systems targeting commercial and military vessels attempting to force the strait. IRGC forces on Karg have deployed mobile Shahed drone launchers, radar-guided anti-ship missile batteries, and hardened underground command nodes linked to the broader Iranian integrated air defense system, the same S-300 and Bayvar 373 network that U.S. air power has been systematically degrading since February 28th, but has not eliminated. The island's civilian infrastructure, oil loading terminals, pipeline junctions, creates the same human shield dilemma that has constrained U.S. targeting throughout the campaign. Any kinetic strike that destroys the terminal facilities would trigger an ecological catastrophe in the Persian Gulf and detonate a political crisis with every Asian economy that depends on Gulf crude. But a precision ground insertion to locate and destroy the weapons systems without touching the oil infrastructure is theoretically executable. The Pentagon's preparation posture confirms this is beyond theoretical. Washington Post reporting from March 28th confirms the Pentagon is actively preparing for ground operations in Iran, with thousands of American soldiers and Marines now arriving in theater. The 82nd Airborne Division, between 2,000 and 3,000 paratroopers, has received written deployment orders for the Middle East as of late March. CENTCOM's stated possible objectives include Karg Island and operations to find and neutralize weapons capable of targeting commercial and military shipping in the strait. The Joint Special Operations Command has also demonstrated, during this conflict cycle, a new operational architecture called RAWS Warfare, a restricted operating zone configuration that allows a ground operator to digitally control an entire air stack overhead without requiring traditional fire control line. Deconfliction. It was first combat tested during Operation Absolute Resolve in Venezuela. Applied over Karg Island, it would allow a 1-2 man JSOC assault element on the ground to call precision-guided munitions from an overhead stack of F, A, 18E, F, Super Hornets and EA, 1-8G Growlers, operating from a carrier strike group, while MQ-9 Reaper ISR platforms maintain persistent 360-degree optical coverage of the island's perimeter. The question is not whether CENTCOM has the capability. The question is whether the National Command Authority has the will to authorize the action before the global energy system enters an irreversible cascade failure. At 0839 hours, simultaneous developments across 3 separate theaters. In northern Israel, Hezbollah, silent since November 2024, under a prior ceasefire, has resumed missile and drone attacks following the U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. On March 2nd, its first salvos since the ceasefire struck northern Israeli communities, activating the full Iron Dome and David's Sling intercept chain along the Lebanese border. The IDF Northern Command has responded by pushing deeper into southern Lebanon's western sector, with IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant Gen. Eyal Zamir announcing the elimination of over 750 Hezbollah fighters across Lebanese territory. But the manpower cost is real. Zamir himself warned Israel's Security Cabinet on March 26th of a growing IDF manpower shortage, arguing that emergency legislation to expand recruitment eligibility must pass immediately. In Lebanon, UNIFIL peacekeepers are taking casualties. On the night of March 29th, a UN peacekeeper was killed and another critically wounded when a projectile detonated at a UNIFIL position near Adchit al-Qusair. 3 journalists were killed in an Israeli airstrike on a marked press vehicle in southern Lebanon on March 28th. 9 paramedics were killed in 5 separate attacks. The WHO has issued emergency condemnations. The Lebanese civilian infrastructure is collapsing under the weight of a war that Lebanon never formally joined, but cannot escape. In Iraq, the Popular Mobilization Force's pro-Iranian militias, now formally integrated into the Iraqi regular army, have been filmed deploying inside Iranian territory as of March 29th, according to Wall Street Journal reporting. Iraq's government, sandwiched between U.S. military bases in the north and an Iranian militia network controlling its south, is spiraling toward the most severe internal political fracture since 2003. The country is being pulled apart by the same centrifugal forces that created it. And in the waters of the Persian Gulf, the clock on the energy crisis is no longer measured in weeks. It is measured in days. Over 1,000 ships, 20,000 seafarers, 90% of Asian crude supplies blocked, oil prices surging. THAAD interceptor stocks at critical depletion levels after expending 1 to 2 years' worth of production in under a month. The U.S. Navy lacking the mine-clearing capacity to force the strait without catastrophic losses. Special Operations Forces now positioned for what would be the most consequential ground raid since the killing of Osama bin Laden. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told G7 foreign ministers on March 27th that the war will continue for another 2 to 4 weeks. He said the United States is communicating with Iran through mediators, and that 2 Iranian officials want direct negotiations but need authorization from the top leadership, the same leadership that on March 8th elevated Mojtaba Khamenei to supreme leader in a succession that internal reporting describes as paralyzed, with severely disrupted decision-making processes and paranoia and internal power struggles. Tehran has rejected every ceasefire proposal, It has publicly denied that any talks are taking place, even as Trump posts the opposite on Truth Social. Iran's conditions for a ceasefire include resolution of the Lebanon conflict, a deliberate escalation demand designed to make termination politically impossible. What this means is that the party with the most to lose from prolonged war, Iran, is the party least capable of making the rational decision to end it. Because the new supreme leader has not yet consolidated power, any concession reads inside Tehran as weakness. And weakness invites the next coup attempt. Here is what the next 96 hours look like on the current trajectory. Iranian drone swarms continue targeting U.S. and allied air assets across the Gulf theater. Each $25,000 Shahed that reaches its target bleeds American air superiority capacity at an exchange rate the industrial base cannot sustain indefinitely. Every Patriot interceptor fired over Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Kuwait is an interceptor that cannot defend the carrier strike group operating in the northern Arabian Sea. The U.S. currently has one confirmed loss, the E-3 Sentry. Iran has thousands of $25,000 drones remaining. The mine threat in the strait intensifies daily as IRGC naval units conduct additional seeding operations under cover of darkness, using fast attack craft that U.S. surface combatants cannot engage without risking the escalation ladder Trump has explicitly refused to climb. Every additional mine laid is another week added to the reopening timeline. The 82nd Airborne arrives in theater. JSOC assault elements move into forward staging positions. The RAS warfare architecture is uploaded into the Link 16 tactical data network. Carrier-based A-18S are armed with JDAM precision-guided munitions preloaded with Karg Island target packages. And somewhere in a buried command node on that island, IRGC commanders are watching the same satellite imagery that Russian intelligence is feeding them, tracking the American force buildup, and calculating how much time they have before the assault comes. The Strait of Hormuz is not a choke point. It is a detonator. And right now, multiple fingers are on the trigger simultaneously. The world's energy supply, the global economy, the escalation ladder between the United States and the largest Iranian proxy network in history, the political survival of a brand new Iranian supreme leader who cannot afford to look weak and cannot afford to look like he ordered a war his father started. Russian ISR assets feeding target data to the force that just killed 12 Americans. A U.S. Navy with a mine gap that cannot be closed in time. And a ground assault option that, once executed, will define the entire strategic character of the 2026 Middle East war for decades to come. What would you do? If you were the CENTCOM commander holding the Karg Island raid order, do you execute and risk widening the war, or do you hold and watch the global economy fracture? Leave your assessment in the comments below. Because the men and women making this decision right now are reading the same intelligence you just heard, and they do not have the luxury of waiting for the next video. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed for 31 days. The longest previous closure in recorded history lasted 6. We are in uncharted water, and the next move, whether it comes from a JSOC team in the dark over the Persian Gulf, or from a desperate signal out of Tehran, or from a Shahed drone, no radar caught in time, will not announce itself in advance. Stay sharp, stay informed, and understand this clearly. The global order you woke up to this morning was built on the assumption that 20% of the world's oil moves freely through 21 miles of Iranian-controlled water. That assumption is gone. What replaces it is being decided right now in real time by people with weapons and no good options. The mine gap is real, the drone gap is real, and the window to act before the energy cascade becomes irreversible is closing.